So Timm, you're one of the first pioneers around spreading, but also leaving the Teal principles in Switzerland. We look really forward to hear about your journey.
Perfect. Thank you, Liana. And as you said, it's about 20 minutes talk. Most likely, Liana will stop me after 20 minutes because otherwise I go on forever. If there's questions, put it in Menti. I try to monitor the chat as well. It's a bit tricky usually. And just we go wherever makes sense. The main thing is you get the value out of this whole story. I got a few slides, but really only a few slides for context and everything. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see the slides. Good. Here we go.
Yes,
so you should hopefully see the slides. I got a few of you as well here on my screen as well, so I see a few faces. So Scott or Francesco, whenever it's completely stupid, just do that, right? And then I stop talking about that kind of stuff. That's all right. Let me just move on. So turning Teal, more compassion in the workplace, as Eliana said, one of my favorite topics. I've also been obviously talking at Teal around the world all the other 3 years. So whenever I repeat myself too much because you listened to the talks before, let me know. Bit of context, who are we? So there's a company called Life Sciences. I was inspired by Frederick's book in 2015 when I read it, which was about the time when I quit my other job and we created this one here together with 2 other guys. So, and back in the days, it sounded a bit naive, to be honest. I worked for big pharma before, so it sounded naive, it sounded exciting. It was good enough anyway to try. So we set it up that way. So we say, we try to find our path in this Teal world, whatever that might be. We are not necessarily missionaries, so I'm not saying that this is the only way or that's the way to go, but it's probably an interesting one to explore, and there's reasons why you are here. If you want to join the 2 p.m. session, I think is Otti Vogt and Antoinette Weibe on stage, and they'll tell you why Teal is actually not good. So just in case you want to get some contrast to this one here, that might be an interesting talk. And yeah, so we are self-organizing for 7 years now. What you see on the right-hand side is our cow. So we got a company cow. Why am I showing that? Because nobody remembers my talk, but everyone remembers the cow. That's the experience. So I thought, well, at least you remember the cow if you don't remember anything else. And I can tell you more about that if you're interested. On the top right little picture, there's a document that's called Lifeline. So this is our internal, how do we see collaboration? How should it look like, a kind of document? And we'll go into a bit more what this looks like, because this is, I think, one of the bases for what we would call probably compassionately working together. So in a nutshell, for everyone, I don't know what the level is of experience with Teal, if everyone has heard Teal before or not even. So we just moved away from this typical pyramid hierarchical kind of setup 7 years ago and based everything more what you see on the right-hand side. What you see is our org chart, or one of the org charts. Is actually not the recent one. I think it's a screenshot from a few weeks ago when I prepared. So but this is roughly what your org chart looks like. It's circles, it's roles. So it's not job-based, it's a role-based way of working. It's obviously inspired by Frederick's, or also, other directions like sociocracy, holocracy type of self-management, self-organization. So even though I'm one of the founders and I'm also one of the owners, unfortunately or fortunately, depends on the day, people don't necessarily do what I say. And there's a few smiling like Chrissa, yeah, really good, exactly. You're one of the ones who's not doing what I'm saying all the time. It's always the same story. But it's still good. And then there's days where I'm like, it would be so nice. I'm the boss. I just tell everyone what to do and they just do what I say. Sometimes I have these days, I must admit. But generally speaking, it is an interesting setup. It is good for, all the autonomy. We have an autonomy by design with that. We have our structure that's evolving, which is also why this picture is never up to date. There's an online link as well that I can share with you if you want. But it's really, it's changing every month more or less. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's definitely focusing on the collaboration, on getting the work done. We hopefully have a bit more entrepreneurial setup as well. And certainly it's based on trust, on autonomy. So that's one of the ideas. There is a ton of challenges coming with that. Right? So for example, how do you create alignment? How do you create alignment without telling people, without being the boss? And how do you do that with all the different needs and demands that everyone has individually? So in our little team, around 20 people, we, I think, got 12, 13 different nationalities, anything from the Philippines to, German. I'm German. We got Chrissa, who's Greek. We got all sorts of other people here. And just because I think as a German, this is how alignment is created. Doesn't necessarily mean that the Greek or the Filipinos or the French, even worse. I don't know if Axel is here, but the French are even worse. Obviously. So there's all sorts of different ways to create alignment. How do we do that in a compassionate way, trying to understand each other? Especially across cultures, but also generally. And how do you create that alignment without narrowing it down so much that you limit the autonomy completely? This is one of the biggest challenges, probably. And that goes along with being a founder, being an owner of the company. How do we self-organize? Legally, I can call certain shots. Legally, I can decide on certain things. So how does that play in the dynamic of the team? How do we make sure it's actually not coming into the day-to-day? The screen is probably a bit too small, but you will not see a managing director role in there. You will not see a founder role in there. You will not see an owner role in there. So that said, there's also no special decision rights that come with this. I'm one of the founders. So this is an interesting one. And then there's, all the other things that you're probably aware if you looked into these topics, information flow, how does leadership look like in a more decentralized way? But I think one thing that I do want to talk about a bit more today, because if you know Frederick and Reinventing Organizations' 3 pillars on purpose, evolutionary purpose, wholeness, and self-management, a bit underrepresented usually is the wholeness part. So how do you do that in a day-to-day? And one thing that I will note as a challenge is this one here: wholeness and vulnerability can be overwhelming. It's not necessarily the most straightforward one. If you are an emotional rock, like a typical German like me, then it's even more overwhelming. So that's not necessarily coming naturally. There's other people who probably struggle a little bit less with that. But this is also something that we need to talk about if we talk about compassionate workplaces. How do we actually in a day-to-day build in this wholeness element? How do we grow that psychological safety or that safe space? And this is not necessarily the most straightforward one. And one thing that I think many of you have figured out already is twice a year training on what psychological safety is, or LinkedIn Learning by Amy Edmondson, is probably not doing the job. So what else can we do about it? And this is a bit also the topic for today. We can dive into all sorts of other places as well. One of the Teal foundations, if you want, that we have or that we are trying is we want to do business with a sense, with a purpose, with a meaning, with impact. And at the same time, we know that it's a for-profit business. And so how do you balance that? And how, in that already tricky balance, how do you do that with even bringing your whole self to work? Knowing that there is a business, knowing that if there's downturns and the business is not going well, we will probably have to lay off people. Or the other way around, how do we make sure that, in times where it does go well, that we are not also overwhelmed, busy and doing the work with just the operational things, and still keep looking into these kind of things. And to make it even worse, is fully transparent. Usually is a pretty purpose-driven, passionate team here. How do you stop? How do you take a break? How do you take a break on a Wednesday afternoon when you know that everyone else is working? This transparency and this whole freedom and autonomy can be overwhelming. So this is where the wholeness part can easily be overwhelming, and is not necessarily always an easy journey, I guess. So what could that mean in practice? I thought I'd give you some examples so to make it a bit more tangible. There's things, and if you know Patrick Lencioni and the Lencioni pyramid, maybe the second layer, the second lowest layer on the Lencioni pyramid is conflict, or is constructive conflict. So I think one of the key things is we have to have conflict in a healthy organization. We have to have conflict in a compassionate type of Teal organization. So we're investing a lot of time into that, actually, in trying to make tensions and all this a normal, a day-to-day, plan A, not a plan B. And what it looked like right from the beginning, basically, we had a weekly team meeting. Also, when we were only 3 or 4 people in the beginning, we had the team meeting every Friday. And one of the standing agenda items on every team meeting was tensions. Every team meeting, we talked about tensions. And then after a while, we figured, probably 3 years ago now or so, it would derail the whole weekly meeting because it took too long. We had too many tensions in the team, which was great, actually. It was great seeing that people are naturally raising their tensions, naturally sharing what they think, naturally bringing these things up. And at the same time, we said, well, can't always have a weekly team meeting of 3 hours. It just doesn't work. And that's not economically viable. And it looks like tensions need more room. So we've created what we call a tension meeting. We got it once a month now. Every Tuesday evening, we got a tension meeting. The only topic on the agenda is tensions in the team. We are now thinking of making it bi-weekly, actually, because we still got too many tensions to process, which is great. Don't get me wrong. We actually like that. And then we figured, let's give it a bit of structure. Let's try to help people structure their tensions and just lower the bar, or to lower the hurdle of actually expressing tensions. And what we use is a framework that probably many of you know. It's nonviolent communication, where you start reflecting on your tension first of all, with the observation. What do I actually observe? What do I see? Try to de-link that from the interpretation that I already have, because there's feelings around it, usually emotions and all that. And then think about, well, what do I need? What do I actually look for? And what's then based on that the request to the team. So giving it a structure just helps people to bring in their needs. And what is really interesting is there is tensions where different people in the team have a similar observation and have a similar tension, and maybe even the feelings are similar, but the needs are completely different. And so this is also an interesting one. What do you do about that? Just because me and Rhea got the same tension doesn't mean we got the same needs. Most of the time, actually, we have different needs. So there's also not always a natural solution to that. So this is an interesting one. And also, obviously, the thing that happens if you start writing it down, at least for me as well, you start reflecting in a different way. Half the emotion's already gone when you have that conversation, which is also good. We have a conversation that's not so much about the person, hopefully. We have a conversation about what are my needs, what am I missing? Or what are we missing maybe as a team as well. That's one example. There's another example that we've stolen from Kelly Hall and the Niaga team as well a few years ago for feedback. Oscar model, focusing feedback mainly on the outcome, the situation, the choices, and the actions. And then at some point in time, you can review, obviously, as well. And the idea behind this is, feedback is a gift in regards to you can learn, you can improve, you can develop as a person as well. But it's completely differently framed. If we frame it around the outcome and the goals of the session, we might figure out, well, actually, that's already the misalignment. I did something because I thought there was a completely different outcome that we wanted to generate. So this is also another framework to help people. So what I'm suggesting is think about what are the values, what are the things that are important for you to create a compassionate environment. And then based on that, what are frameworks that could help people live up to these ambitions, to these ideas? Because it's not necessarily always easy. Another thing I want to show you is, I think that culture, or Teal culture, any culture actually, is, and yours I think said that as well before. You can't create a culture. You can't transform into a culture, or you can't transform your culture. So what do we do? If culture is just the sum of behaviors, my definition is culture is just the sum of behaviors. The more behaviors you change in the team, the more it will create a culture naturally. And since we are all always busy and distracted from kids and around us, what's going on in life, then there's clients, there's business, there's whatever. There's the little practices that or maybe on a regular basis, not always on a weekly basis, that can be really helpful. And I thought I'd just share a few inspirations. They might not work for copy paste for you, but maybe get you thinking about some of the stuff. So one thing we do is we have something on the top left, what we call the stress level pendulum, and we share that every week in the team. Basically, everyone puts a little, so our team meeting is virtual. That's maybe context to have. So everyone puts a sticky on the board, on the virtual whiteboard, and says, well, how do I feel? How did I feel this week? Am I stretched? Is so much going on? Is it optimum? Is it maybe even boring? Is too low level? And how do I feel with it? Because I could be stretched and it feels great, because there's Teal around the world Thursday, Friday. It's a stretch from Monday through Wednesday. And it's still great because we have this little event here. So there's that kind of a quick thing of sharing, and then is a great basis for conversation, because this is the other thing. Probably a compassionate workplace means, all you can do in my eyes is provide a platform for conversations. We do have something that we call lifeguard corner. So there's a role, if you look at our org chart, there's a role that's called lifeguard. So kind of our lifeline, culture, Teal idea, guardian in a way. And there's little exercises that they do with us. One of the lifeguards actually with us here, Krisa. So if you have questions around lifeguard corner, let her know. And basically it's just reminding and doing little exercises for us, one, to get to know each other, but also to keep the practice going. And this one here specifically was around feedback and listening exercise, actually. And we all know, we've all visited, 27 trainings on how to listen, active listening and whatnot. And, you can never really master it, I think. And there's the part, well, it's good. It's like a muscle. If you train it, it will get better. So this is one of the ideas as well. And so Chrissa and the other lifeguard, we got a, what is it now, 15 minutes, I think, what we call lifeguard corner. They bring in certain practices and exexercises for us to just,
在里面呢就会给大家做这种练习，让大家训练。
Sorry, trying to get the interpretation out here. Here we go. And then we got something that I find really, really helpful.
我们也看到了一些非常有意思的、非常有用的一些东西。
Sorry about that. I'm just trying.
No. All good.
Sorry about that. All good.
No worries at all. I mean, I speak a bit of Chinese, but that was too fast for me, so that doesn't work.
我会说中文的，但是刚才这个中文说的太快了，所以我也。
I think we probably changed the channel for the interpretation. I guess that's what will be needed. Anyway, what I wanted to share as well, bottom left, is what we call LPS, lessons learned, praise, and success. So why do we do that on a weekly basis? Because we say in our lifeline, our culture, reflecting and learning together is an important value. Now, the thing is, I understood that intellectually. I never take the time to reflect and learn something properly anyway, because there's so many things going on. And with that little reminder once a week, kind of in a nice way, I get forced by the team to reflect, what did I actually learn this week? What was the biggest insight, the biggest learning, kind of a light bulb moment? So we share that with everyone in the team. And as you can imagine, one way is I reflect on my learning, but it's actually so interesting to hear what the other 10, 15 people might share in their learnings, and we can reflect together. The second one is what we call life praise. It's basically about gratefulness. What am I grateful this week? What am I thankful for the team, or also outside the team? And it got a lot to do with appreciation and recognition, because compassionate workplaces or Teal workplaces, or any workplace, in fact, is also built on that. On that, how do we appreciate each other? And it's really nice to just hear a few positive words from people, what they appreciated. Even if it's not about me, or if it's not about my project or my team or my part of the team, it's just nice to hear what everyone appreciates about their week and what they were grateful for. And it's obviously also a way of connecting, because that's usually one of the deeper sharings. And then the other thing, success of the week, we spend a lot of time on thinking about what could we improve, what could be better, where did we not do well, and all these kind of things. And sometimes we should stop and just tap ourselves on the shoulders and say, hey, well, actually, well done. There was one thing. And it doesn't need to be a world-changing huge thing. It's a little success. I don't know, things like, oh, I started drinking more water because it's actually healthy. There you go. It's already a success, better than nothing. So we're also sharing that in the team, and that kind of to end the weekly meeting usually. One other thing that I also put there as part of the weekly meeting in D2 is somewhere in the middle of the part is what we call what sucked this week, because it can't always be all great. There is frustrating moments, and it's good to get it out. It's good to talk about it. Maybe there's some help from the group that can at least make it a little bit better. And if not, at least we talk about it. It's not always great, shiny fun. That's unfortunately not the case. So Liana, if I get 1 more minute or 2 more minutes, and then I finish and we go for questions. Because one thing I wanted to share with you as well, there's a process that we call self-set salaries. So everyone's setting their salaries themselves, free range. And why do I share that? Not because many companies or organizations will be able to copy paste that, right? Is probably not a process. I don't know, Scott, for example, in Roche is probably tricky to go to self-set salaries, and probably it is for many organizations. But it is an interesting process, and it is an interesting process if we talk about wholeness and these kind of dynamics, because obviously one part is all of our salaries are transparent and they're self-set. That means there's a lot of exposure. If I say I want to earn X amount of money, 50,000, 100,000, whatever it might be, then it's a lot of exposure. And then it also means there's a lot of dynamic around it. And as we know from research and also from just practical experience, it actually doesn't matter if I make 50,000 or 60,000. The important thing is Eliana makes 65. So I'm now frustrated because she makes 5K more. Typical story. The relative salaries are much more interesting than the absolute, at least if we have a certain level. Right? And this is why I wanted to share this. It's incredibly interesting, the reactions, to see the dynamics around salaries. And it's incredibly interesting to see what it means for what you need to create to go through that process. So technically speaking, it's just an advice process, like Frederick describes it in the book as well. You just ask people for advice, and then I decide for my salary. Theoretically super easy, but then what are the tensions that are coming up? What are the things that bother me? Again, it's probably not so much about my salary, it's just that Eliana earns more, and how do we process that? So I just wanted to share this because I think it's an interesting one to also reflect. How do you create that safe space that people can actually share? And you might not be able to solve it, right? I might be bothered that Scott is totally overpaid, and he probably is, but it doesn't matter. I can't change it. So how can I let go of that as well? Is an interesting one, because we only just sell once a year, because otherwise admin bureaucratic effort just gets too high. So we do that once a year. So how can I let go of that feeling that I think somebody's overpaid, and doesn't necessarily bother me for a year, and we can still work together on a constructive level. So this is also some of the things that are really interesting. And I think this whole, how do you create a platform, a room for that conversation is incredibly important. So with that, I will stop screen sharing. I see most of you guys again, and I'll see if Eliana, if we got questions, or what kind of questions we got. I can also have a look at the chat where Otti is probably posting all sorts of smart stuff again.
Yeah, we actually have a lot of questions, and really very good ones. So I would take the first one, which is giving and receiving feedback is stressful for both sides. So what do you think that can help in this process, especially related to this salary topic, which is pretty hot?
Yeah.
What has happened before?
Well, for the salary topic, it's a bit of a special one, I guess, but it's the same ideas. So I think first of all, make it similar to tensions, make it a plan A and not a plan B. It's part of the day-to-day. It's part of the collaboration of how we work together. It's just a normal thing. So if you practice that often enough, it also feels more natural compared to, just do it once a year or something like that. That will be the first thing. The other thing, so one of my co-founders, Frank, he always said mental toothbrushing. And so I prepare for that meeting, or I prepare for going into that room. I'm like mentally brushing my teeth, and it's like, okay, the frame for the meeting is good intent. It's not personal, and if it gets personal, it's probably telling more about me if I provide the feedback than it tells about the other person anyway. So, just framing it, just consciously framing the meeting will help. And maybe not only for myself when I go into such meetings, but also when I'm in the meeting, don't kick off the meeting, obviously, with, this is the feedback or whatever. This is what Daniel messed completely up. That is probably not a good way. So we can say, hey, anything that we are saying here is coming from good intent. We are both sitting here and we have a good intent. I think everyone agrees to that in our team, at least. Right? And we are here to learn, and we are here to grow. And the other thing that I usually use for framing is as well, but feedback is just feedback. Take it or leave it. It's not like I am right. It's just my observations. It's my perspective. It's most likely biased. Most likely is 100% it's biased. So it's just what it is, and then take it from there. And this can already be helpful. And the other thing, as I said before, this Oscar kind of framework might be helpful if you need that. If you want to take certain steps, almost, it could also be helpful.
Great. Then we have a question that has a lot of likes over there. So let's go with that. You said you have, oh, wait a minute. The things coming in. Sorry about that. So after sharing, after sharing the tension, actually, how to then figure out how to solve it?
Yeah, so especially the salary ones, but also for other tensions, one solution to the tension might be there's actually no solution. And that's the trickiest ones. And it's just, the only thing you can do is let go of it. Kind of try to get okay with it. And that's it. There's not much you can do for other things. Again, for salaries and other things like sensitive topics that are dear to my heart, that are either triggering me because of my values or, you know, something like that, it's incredibly tough to accept that let go is the only choice. But sometimes that is the choice. And then, you know, and I guess many of the speakers throughout the day and tomorrow will tell you, go get yourself a coach. This is what I do. I actually have different coaches, so I switch around from time to time to just get different inputs. And I think most of the team actually do have coaches, and just help to go through that kind of stuff. So I think this is really helpful. And other than that, other than getting a coach for some of the reflections, letting go, there is sometimes actions. It could be an adjustment in a role, like the little bubbles that you saw before. There's maybe a process that we can change. So there's a ton of tensions we had around the salary process, right? And we did adjust the process. So it evolved over time. It's version, whatever is now 3 or something. It's not like turning it upside down, but, slight evolution of the process. There's also other things because people are like, well, do we value our lifeline enough? Was a tension, and people felt like we don't do that enough. So one of the kind of actions we took was, well, let's create a lifeguard corner. Let's make sure that we talk about it weekly. Let's make sure that in our monthly offsites, we give a bit of room for these kind of topics and not just for the operational things. So, this is I think really, really important. And then, there's all sorts of individual things. So we do have kind of so if you look into the lifeline, and I can share the link with you actually later in chat. So if you look at the lifeline, there's also a process for our tensions. And basically the process says, first of all, try to resolve it one-on-one if you can. And if not, get yourself a coach or mediator or something. And that might be the solution for the tensions. It's just somebody who can help you get over it almost, or to help you have a proper conversation if you can't, because it's too much emotion maybe in that one. So all sorts of different ways to resolve a tension, and sometimes it means you just need to let go.
Thank you. Yeah, that's not always easy, but it's a big takeaway for us.
Yeah, no, I think this is true for everything that I'm talking about. Is it sounds easier when you talk about it. When you're in the situation, it can be incredibly tough. It can be uncomfortable. It can be frustrating. It can be everything. And so,
great. We have a lot of different topics, but let's pick something which fits on the rest of the presentation. So maybe let's go with. Give me a minute. So maybe how do you make sure that the daily or weekly practices don't end up becoming just formalities and really people join there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, spice it up from time to time. It's the same with retrospectives. If you always do the same, good, bad, whatever, glad, mad, sad, or whatever kind of retrospective structure you use, spice it up. There's a million different templates. There's a million different ways you could ask these questions, and that's the same for us. I think for some of the topics. So that just to use that example again from the lifeguard corner, it's not every week we talk about feedback. It's not every week we draw an orange in a house. It's not what it is. So we just change that from time to time. I think what also is interesting, we sometimes switch facilitation for the offsites, but also for the weekly meetings. Sometimes we get external people in, and that's mainly also to just get a different perspective, get a different way of doing things probably, and to just play around with what might be there. And we also had awful sessions, right? Don't get me wrong. We had sessions where we either had people coming in who didn't get the Teal context enough, and it was not great. And then we had sessions that we facilitated internally, and it was awful because it just didn't go well. So that's also part of it. But at least we tried something new, and it's sometimes more, sometimes less fun, I guess. But that's what I would do probably. And the other thing that is important, I think it is important to keep certain routines. So things like the praise or the success of the week, I do think it is important to keep that. It might not sound super exciting, but actually it's always fun. Every week, again, it's good to hear what people have been successful with. There's certain rituals that we created. So when we talk about culture and creating this space of compassion, I don't think we need a lot of rules and structures and processes and whatnot, but we need certain rituals maybe. So I've shown you the cow before. So we visit our cow in the Swiss Alps once a year. This year, I think in June or July or something. So we'll have 3 days. One, we'll visit the cow, just to visit the cow, and as a ritual, and we like our cow to an extent, and we cook good cheese and all that. But also usually on the second evening, usually on a Thursday evening, we have something that we call personal purpose sharing. So we sit around, is one of the pictures you saw there as well, some nice scenery outside, and just talk about what is important to me, what is my personal purpose. So does that get boring? Well, it does get boring to hear me talking about my purpose for like the 7th time now, because I kind of know, and yes, it's evolving slightly, but it's not like totally different. So it's boring to hear myself, but it's actually interesting to hear the others, and it's interesting the evolution of the purposes, and the team constellation changes. That's an important ritual that I would always say, let's keep that one. Yes.
Great, thank you so much. The next question related to this topic is about knowing how many people are in the company and how many of them are actually joining these tension meetings.
I mean, there's a reality where we do have, work that paid work in a way. Right? So there is a reality where we are probably never everyone in the meeting. We had times with really good attention to that one. So, it was 80% of the people were there. We had other meetings where it was probably the other way around, and we only had 20%. This is also tension in itself then probably, where people start asking, well, is it not interesting enough? Do we need to change something? What was the reasons for it? So this is one of the questions that we ask ourselves, of course. And but yeah, usually good attention.
Great, thank you. And we have some of the questions which are really upvoted, so I think we need to follow them. The one is you said you had fully transparency. So is there any data or anything that is not really transparent out there, like turnover, salary we know already, but anything else?
No, so there's everything transparent as part of the setup. Salaries are transparent, revenue is transparent. I don't know, numbers on the bank account is transparent, but you don't get it live because our bank doesn't want 20 people to play around in the e-banking, which is fair. But you can copy paste out the number relatively easily, so it's not a big deal. So everything's transparent. I mean, there's things that are restricted to the team due to non-disclosure, confidentiality agreements with partners, with clients, whatever. Of course, we have that legally. We have to have. There's a certain protection mode for personal data, GDPR and stuff, but generally it's transparent. But this is one of the things, because I think some people in the chat were also asking, like Stephanie and Mia and so on, well, how do you scale that to big companies? And obviously this is one of the things, you can't make everything transparent if it's a bigger company. So if you're working for a big multinational, it's unlikely that you will be allowed to make salaries transparent from HR, or how they call them now, people and culture people. Yeah? So you will not be allowed to do that. And I think it actually doesn't matter. The thing is, make transparent what you're allowed to make transparent and what not. If you are in a leadership position and you're like, well, I cannot talk about salaries with you guys because I will get into compliance issues. Well, that's all right. Then tell your team that this is the case. And if you're not allowed to talk about budget numbers, we have clients that like, is the holy cow. You can't talk about budget, which I find amazingly stupid, but it is what it is. So then tell your team, well, I can't share with you. I cannot talk about budget. Okay, fine. We might like it. We might not like it. There's certain things that the Swiss authorities want and need from us as well, and we don't like it. But it's part of the game. So we live in that setup, and that's okay. The important thing is talk about it, share it, and with that you can also avoid frustration in the team. So there's so much you can do. Shape that room that you can shape, I think, is really important. And let go of the rest to an extent, and kind of either you find workarounds, you find compromises, or you just manage that intersection in a way. Right?
Yeah, which is great. I just like Stephanie's comment. It's really treating adults as adults, actually. So we are also able to understand the boundaries. If they are transparent, then we know why it's like that. Some things we can change, some things we cannot, and there's just a loss of energy to focus on that. Okay, then the next question, who has a lot of votes, is how do you manage the structure of your organization? Is this actually holacracy or anything else? And what did you change during the journey?
That's a good question. What is it? I don't know what it is. And in case Brian Robertson is listening, of course it's holacracy, Brian, but maybe it's not. And actually it doesn't really matter what it is. So when in 2015, when Frank, Steph, and I started, we were trying to find examples because we liked Frederick's book, we liked the Teal idea, and we had no idea what to do, how to do it anyway. So we were looking for examples in mainly Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, because that's the kind of environment that we live in. And back in the days, it was a lot of holacracy hype. So, 2015, almost the only thing you found in self-management in 2015 was holacracy, which was great starting point. So we did start with holacracy for the roles. So if you look at the tool, it's Holaspirit. It's a tool that's also kind of derived from the holacracy world. It's still got the same structure. Every role got a purpose. Every role got domains, decision domains, and every role got accountabilities. So in that sense, it's typical holacracy setup, just by documenting the roles. But then again, you would find it in other tools as well. In Peerdom, in Mapio, in Sociocracy, you actually do it the same way. So it's difficult to say what it is. What I can say is our weekly meetings don't look anything like holacracy weekly meetings, and that's probably back in the days. Especially Frank and me, we like our freedom. We don't like to get told. I think last week somebody asked Tim, "What do you do if somebody wants to tell you something?" Oh, I don't like that. So that kind of stuff. So it was too rigid for us. So we didn't do that from the beginning. We got some elements of the tactical back in some point in time because it was just growing bigger. So I think there is value in that. But it just didn't work by the book for us. And so we rather, I would say, we mix and match. So the governance meetings look relatively similar to what you would probably see in holacracy. And then there's other things that we take from liberating structures, from the S3 framework of James and the guys, right? There's so many good things from kollegiale Führung, from Bernd and colleagues. So there's so many things that you can use out there. And it really doesn't matter what you use, as long as you know why you're using it and what the value of that tool is that you're using, because the tool is just a tool at the end of the day. And that's true for our structures as well. And then we came up with all sorts of other stupid ideas where we just thought it was fun, and some we ditched like 3 weeks later, and some we still have 7 years later. So it's just also trial and error to an extent. And by the way, I think this is something. So if we talk about scaling and bigger companies and bigger context, this is exactly what I always would recommend you do there as well. Talk to your team. Have a conversation, like, this is what we want to achieve. Like, we want to work a bit on appreciation, recognition, whatever. Have a little bit of a brainstorming. What could we do? Make sure it's regularly happening, I think, is the key thing for me, at least. And then, see what practice sticks and what practice doesn't stick. So the whole the whole tension process is not only for tensions within the system, it's also for tensions working on the system. And that is true for, whatever practices we have. So, and things like the live price, the pricing section just evolved from these tensions, basically.
Great, thank you so much. Maybe this relates a little bit. It's not about structure, but I think it's a very good question related to this compassionate way of understanding each other. So how do your values actually influence your choice of partners or customers?
Big time, probably. Simply because some people don't like to work with us. We're too strange, we're too crazy, we're too different, I guess. It's not, doesn't link well. And then there's other people like Eliana, we like each other, we get along, we have a certain chemistry, we talk for years, and it's just a good basis. So I think what is important is to talk about values and to share these values and to just have a conversation again about these kind of things. So the document, like a lifeline or like a culture book or like, all of these handbooks that are out there, or team charters or whatnot, is all good stuff. I would always recommend people do that. But it will not do the job of alignment. Because if we say transparency, I think probably everyone in the room would say, yes, we like transparency. Okay, do you like your salary to be transparent? And then there's probably already a declining number. Would you like to have transparency of where you work all the time, kind of tracked? And then probably it declines further. So just because we say we like transparency and everyone likes transparency doesn't mean anything. And that is true for almost anything else. So we use these high-level buzzwords and we're like, yeah, okay, we like integrity. We like, I don't know, whatever, courageous ideas. Of course. But I only like the courageous ideas as long as it doesn't hurt my way of working, right? So it's just really important to talk about these things, I would say. And this is also, if you want to scale it, is really important. Yes, you can write a document, but be sure that you understand this document is a basis for conversation. Nothing more, nothing less. It will not be able to cut the conversation, and it's just impossible. Or your document will be like 1,000 pages long because it's so elaborated, and then nobody will read it. So it doesn't do the job either. documents will never do the job, I guess.
And that's a good point. We had actually in the chat 2 questions related to this topic. One of them, how do we actually get that alignment, right? So if we are not trying to push too much, not commanding, controlling around, so you would say it's about having a dialogue and really discussing what are we really standing for.
Yeah, and I think there's an important difference of what do I value and what is a core value that cannot be violated. So again, we're coming from all sorts of different cultural backgrounds, and there's, you know, at the moment I listened to Erin Meyer's book, the Culture Map, and she got some good scales to give you orientation of, you know, where societal or geographical context, you know, just has different interpretations of, for example, also hierarchy. Because in some cultures, it just means, you know, if we are not looking towards the boss in the room, it's just not polite. It's sometimes even offensive. And still, these people would say, "I'm an empowering leader," and probably some of us, like me, would probably sit there. I don't think that's what I would you know, observe as empowerment necessarily. So, you know, there's that part where certain things you probably cannot accept from your value system, and we need to be clear about that, and this is okay. And then the company or the organization needs to be clear about that. What are the values that we value, and what are the things that we just will not accept? No way. You know, if it's your best salesperson, still we will not accept that. And also these things need to have a conversation. Right? So what is it that we don't accept? We had conversations, just to give you a simple example. We had conversations with the team for years actually. Do we work with everyone in the world, or do we exclude certain clients? Do we exclude certain industries? Because it's just so not fitting our value system. And we did have that. So we did turn down contracts, and we did say, no, that's not what we want to do. Other people might, and that's totally fine. But it's not our idea. It's not our DNA. So we just don't do that. And again, this is also for internal collaboration. And then there's other things like, you know, things that I value. So I do value efficiency. We have other people in the team who are probably the opposite. They value all sorts of other things, and it drives me nuts. And I like efficiency. Everyone inefficient drives me nuts, and that's okay. And that's part of the game. There's different values. There's different needs. There's different everything, and it's okay. We get along. We figured it out. You know, simple examples as well with Frank, my co-founder. I love him. I hate him. So he will never reply to Slack, email, whatever. You know, asynchronous way of communicating is just not his thing. So I have to call him. And for me, like, I like my day structured in meetings, and I know what I'm doing, and it's good. I don't have time to call him. So, well, we need to find a way, right? He wants to be called. I don't like calls. I actually hate telephone calls as well. So what do we do? Well, you know, there's ways around it, and this is good to have a conversation about that. What do we value? And it's not triggering us that much that we say, well, that's completely, you know, out of bounds, completely offensive or whatever.
Great. We have one more question which has a lot of likes, so I would like to go with that as next. And it is, how does the founder's absence linked to ideas about the source? And maybe you need some context about this, but
yeah. So for everyone who doesn't know what the source is, have a look at Peter Koenig's work. I think there's also as a living room conversations of one of our podcasts, whatever video podcast things is called living room conversation. There's a good series with Peter Koenig and the source. There's a few things I disagree with Peter, by the way, about source work and that stuff. One is that Peter says there's only one source for every organization, one source. And I would say not necessarily true for us, but anyway, we can have a conversation about that. But yeah, so there is there's definitely something missing with, for example, Frank has left as well end of November, right? So there's one source, or probably this source to an extent, has been leaving as well. So what does that do to the team? What does it do for all sorts of dynamics? Will be an interesting thing to observe going forward as well. There is a different dynamic when, for example, Frank's not around and now I'm not around or Stefan's not around. There is a dynamic change, but it's also dynamic change if, I don't know, Rhea or Krisa or whoever is not around. So you know, it's always dependent on the team constellation, I would say. And I think Jos in the other session said, you know, the best thing as a founder is to be absent. So he's doing that a lot, and I would agree. Right? I don't want to be involved in everything. I certainly don't want to be involved in all sorts of decisions taken on a day-to-day. I do have my things that I like. I do have my things where I'm good at. Right? And that's the stuff that I want to work on. And this is the beauty of the whole self-management. I'm not involved because I'm a founder. Because if I was, then we are actually back to the typical pyramid type of thing. Because of status or position, I'm involved. That doesn't make sense. Then we could do it differently as well.
Nice. Thank you. So we have a lot of questions around scaling your model. So how would you maybe bring a little bit more of Teal into big corporates, or what are the bigger blockers or enablers for such a transformation?
Yeah. I think some people in the chat dropped me a note as well. Well, tell us more about where you're coming from. So I grew up in the Basel area. Okay, and in Basel area is not so much a question: do you work for pharma or not? It's more a question: is Roche, Novartis, or one of the other pharma companies? So this is obviously I went into pharma. So this is the natural choice in Basel. So I worked for one of the big guys in Basel. And for the last 13 years of consultancy work, I spent probably 95% of my time in some kind of pharma, hospital, life sciences, environment, healthcare sector. So, and mostly in big multinationals. So, and what I would always do is, first of all, be clear why you're doing that, because everyone's like agility, Teal, self-organized teams, empowered teams, whatever you call it. Right? And as soon as you start a question, well, why do you want to do that? Either get silent, or it's like, well, because somebody told me, my boss, worst case, or the CEO said we are on a Teal transformation. No, that's not helpful as a reason. Is there hopefully there is a better reason for that? So why are you going on that journey? What do you expect as well? And I think with leaders or leadership teams, one of the questions I would always ask, well, do you know what that means for your role? How do you think your role will be changing? Because it's nice to have a self-managed team as long as they're successful. As soon as they're not successful and shit hits the fan, then you are still in your leadership position, most likely, because it's unlikely your 100,000 people company transforms overnight to something like our bubble thingy, and it will have an org chart. And even if it was bubbles and stuff, there's legal topics, so you never get completely rid of that anyway. So are you prepared to take that shit coming from the top, where you're actually not in control for everything that happens in your self-managed organization? Do you like that? Most people don't. And there's also things: are you prepared to not have an answer to the question of the boss when she's asking you something? And because you can't control everything. I mean, first of all, you can't control in a hierarchical environment anyway, but you can pretend at least. In a self-managed way, you probably can't. So how do you stay in control without controlling is one of the questions, right, that Ricardo Semler always asks. So this is an interesting one as well. And I think generally for big multinationals or for scaling it up, I would always go for smaller areas where you get this autonomy. So and kind of a prerequisite is, if Frank wants to go, let's say Teal, in a big organization, is the boss on board? And hopefully the boss of the boss is also at least like, okay, just do it. So that's part of the hierarchical game. If the 2 levels above you are not on it, it will get at least incredibly difficult, let's just say. And so this will be an important one. And then you need to have the crazy odd ones who are courageous enough to try it out, because you're kind of breaking the system. And in all sorts of big organizations, also if you look into how the big transformations in Roche started, in all sorts of other companies started, is there was the ones who said, I'm doing that because I think it's the right thing. I know why I'm doing that. And if you want to fire me, well, then fire me tomorrow. It's your bad. And you need these people in the beginning, kind of the crazy odd ones who dare to do that, and is a sort of a risk. But I think that's what you need in the beginning. And then if you want to scale it, I would always go for decentralized kind of experimentation approach. Don't tell people what to do. I would never, or actually never seen that working, let's just say. And these decentralized in a way, well, there's this team of 15 people, there's that business unit of 100 people, there's that country organization of 50 people. Do whatever you think makes sense. Could be holacracy, could be sociocracy, could be kollegiale Führung, could be, you name it, whatever. If you want, try out safe. I wouldn't recommend, but if you want, do that even. So that kind of stuff. Just do it and get going, because what will happen is you will see the constraints of the organization around you relatively quickly. So you learn about where are the boundaries. you will learn about what is missing for you. So a bit like when we started with Holacracy 2015, completely different version of Holacracy compared to now, by the way. But we saw what was missing, so we developed something around it. But we had first-hand experience and not just the theoretical. I read 5 books and 3 blog posts or whatever. So I think this is always good. And obviously, from psychology, we know for decades, small enough units are obviously much easier. And if you try to transform something with 1,000 people where nobody knows each other, much more difficult compared to 120 people. We all know each other's faces. Okay, fine. That's a good starting point, I would say. And from there you can scale it. The challenge will come, and we've seen that with big clients, of course. There's different teams in the same business unit, for example, working in different ways. And some went holacracy and some went other things. So how do you get it back together? How do you make the links working is obviously one of the questions. But I would always argue, and this is one of the reasons why I like Teal around the world so much, is doesn't matter if you call it Teal, holacracy, sociocracy, conscious business, kollegiale Führung, call it whatever you want. It's 70% is the same principles behind. Even lean got 70% the same principles. You know what? If we all went on a journey for our little thing that we like, and 70% is the same with everyone around us and the other teams, you will have a relatively easy job to connect and find the links. So in that sense, I would always go decentralized. Is the short answer, I guess.
Wow, really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. And this would be like the more practical way of looking at this Teal transformation, but there is also this internal part, which is a big challenge, as you just said in the beginning, right? So bringing in wholeness is also a challenge for the personal way. So the next question would be, this person loves your honest sharing, but what are your biggest learnings about your inner development during this journey?
Maybe one comment just quickly on that wholeness journey as well. If you think about transformation or scaling it and so on, I think one of the key things we need to accept, everyone's in a different place. So if you are German engineer, it's probably a different state compared to I don't know, somebody else on earth in regards to how do I connect to emotions and that kind of stuff. So that is also speaking about myself, right? So I didn't spend a lot of time reflecting on my emotions. I'm not necessarily one who's super connected to his body. So I'm not good in sensing that stuff. And so the last, 7 years in this Teal organization, but certainly before that, 2-3 years before, that reflection is not always easy and comfortable, as I said. So there was a lot of reflections around, how do I sense certain things that I was probably in denial mode before? And so that's one thing. I definitely learned a lot about what triggers me. So what kind of values are big and what kind of stuff is triggering me. And then there's, I've had, I don't know, endless hours of communications coaching because I it's one of the improvement areas clearly. And it's always the same, in theory, it works. I get it. 98% of the time I get it quite right, I would say. And then there's the 2, 3, 5% of the time where you trigger me with something that triggers my values, basically, that goes against my values. So how do you find kind of mechanisms and tools when you know that you get triggered from these things is one of the big reflections for me in the last few years as well. So that's that. And I think other than that, there's just many insights around kind of what is it? So how do I want to be seen or perceived from the outside as well? So we all got our saboteurs as well, right? So usually from upbringing or school times latest. So all of these saboteurs is really interesting, and there is things where I would say, I don't care what other people think. Otherwise, I wouldn't do the Teal stuff probably. It's not really the mainstream story if you want to be liked. But then again, it is important what certain people think about me. And this was one of the big kind of light bulb moments almost the last 7 years is I don't care what everyone thinks, but there's this group of people that I do care about a lot. And there was a lot of denial before. So I was like, I don't care about anybody. Right? But it's actually not true. So this is some of the ones. And then, I could tell you stories. I'm a control freak as well. So I like to be in control. Good luck founding a Teal company when you're a control freak, by the way. Don't do that. It's amazingly annoying. So how do you go about that need for control? And even worse, being one of the founders and stuff. So I could tell you about an hour about what that does, but yeah, we got 5 minutes, so maybe stop here.
Okay, but this is really great to know. I think this is really one of the big challenges. You know, Teal is a very attractive thing to become or to experiment with, but this also it implies a lot of work on the structure, on the culture, and also in the inside. I found this book, New Work Needs Inner Work, very interesting, and I think you just like summarized what is within in your few sentences. So maybe one last question before we go. Let's have a look. It relates actually to the last topic. So thank you for being so honest and vulnerable about sharing where you were and where you're now at. So how difficult was it to be so vulnerable with your team within the industry also you work with?
So obviously a journey, right? So you build trust over time. You get to know the people over time. I think it's also interesting to see what people value. So there is something that you know, also myself was, you know, if somebody talks about whatever topic, what was bothering them, and after 30 seconds you figure out, well, you know, it's just the superficial stuff because that's what that person thinks everyone wants to hear. And then there's the other side where, you know, we talk about what actually matters to you, and that makes you vulnerable, of course, right? But it's usually appreciated by the team. So you know, it's the team that helps me to explore that as well, first of all, and then also not only exploring but also sharing. So there's a back and forth in a way, you know, the team reacts in a certain way, feels good or feels safe, you know, so I probably share a bit more next time. And you know, in that sense, this is also coming back to why do we have tension meetings? Why do we have a monthly or every 6 weeks latest offsite? Why do we have these cow days once a year? Well, because, you know, every time it probably feels good in a way. We enjoy it, we share a bit more, and then, you know, every time you share a bit more, and then after a while, it's kind of natural. So I don't know, I've done podcasts, whatever, 3-5 years ago, and probably sound completely different compared to today. And this is part of that development. And you don't necessarily, or I at least don't necessarily recognize it. So if you ask me, you know, vulnerability level 1 to 10 today versus 5 years ago, I'd probably say, well, it's all the same, it doesn't change. But then if you go back to listen to these podcasts, for example, or to talks or whatever, it probably does feel different, and it probably sounds different as well. So I guess it's also that, you know, this unconscious or that implicit inductive learning that just happens, and you know, that's where this team environment is really helpful. So if you and you know, think about a bigger company, if you're that crazy odd one in your big company, nobody gets it, find the people who do get it, right? Because there will be people in every big organization who are similarly interested, and you know, there's for example now tomorrow evening there's an after party happening at Roche Pharma headquarters, and you know, it will not be 80,000 people there, but there's the crazy odd ones, I don't know, 50, 60, 80 of those guys, and you know, it's kind of a support system. So it's also like, am I just completely nuts, or is there something about it? So find your support system without saying, you know, be lost in the bubble, because that's also a tricky one, but at least find people who are similarly interested. And I guess today is a good opportunity to also talk to other people, right?
Yes, and that's a great closing, because right now, just after this session, you have the opportunity to, tie the bonds and maybe get to learn other people who might be a companion, an inspirer, or some kind of inspiration for the next steps you want to take within your organization. So we will be sharing or deep diving into these topics we just shared with Tim here in Spatial Chat. So I will share the link in the chat just in a moment. Give me 1 second. Okay, so you can join over there, and we have the opportunity to deep dive into the conversation for a while as well. So Tim, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I think it's always a pleasure to hear about your learnings and how openly you share with everything, the positive, the negative, and what is about to come. So have fun and join us in the chat afterward. Tim will be there for sure, also for some minutes. So
Absolutely.
we can get on the rest of the questions that we were not able to answer so far.
Great. So, thank you. Pleasure. And see you over there in Spatial. I'll also jump over for next.
Okay. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye.